Okay, we are back for the Maryland 250 Labor History website, and a wonderful opportunity today to talk to Deborah Rootacille, who wrote the wonderful book Roots of Steel, and who grew up in Steel Town. So this is really a Sparrows Point based type history project. So, Deb, good morning, and thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Bill. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your Roots of Steel and how that led you into writing the book.
Okay. I suppose the best place to start is to say that I was born and raised in Dundalk, Maryland. My paternal grandparents lived in Sparrows Point on North Snyder Avenue, which was kind of less than a mile from the mill. They had actually lived in the bungalows in Sparrows Point, but then moved out of the company town to the single house a little further down the road. So I visited there a lot when I was a kid, and my dad used to walk us over to the mill. All the men in my dad's family, including my dad when I was born, worked at Sparrows Point. My dad was working in the tandem mill at the time that I was born, and my mom was a secretary at Steelworkers Local 2610. So I've got pretty strong roots of steel family-wise, but also community-wise, because growing up in Dundalk, I mean, that was a community that was in large part built, and many residents in Dundalk were employed by Bethlehem Steel in my childhood. So those are my roots of steel. I'm a daughter of steel, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
as are, millions of people around the
Yes.
country, as well as thousands of people in Baltimore, hundreds of thousands of people are children of steel like me.
Yeah, and it's a heritage that's unfortunately gone. And I just saw a posting today about did the Democrats kill Sparrows Point? And there were hundreds of responses about why it closed. And most
Oh,
of them
well,
blame
that's,
management and failure to invest and failure to adjust and everything. So we have a whole list of stuff on our Facebook page about Sparrows Point dealing with those questions. And so it's real important. So then
yeah,
I'm sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I address some of that debate in the book. And I
Yeah.
think it's a mistake, certainly, to say it was any one thing. It was a lot of, it was a many tentacled and a many decade process that
Hmm.
unfolded, which
Yeah.
ultimately led to the closure of the mill.
And your book was published several years before the closure of the mill.
It was.
So there were,
I finished the first draft. And that book was published in 2010, right around the time that the Justice Department forced the sale from Middle to Severstall. So yeah, the final, decade is not covered in my book. And
well, I was,
I'd love to update it at some point so that I
yeah,
can include those stories.
because ISG was the last owner, an investment guy out in New York who knew nothing about the steel industry.
Yes, in my book, ISG, who obviously, basically like most private equity companies, purchased not just Sparrows Point, but also all of
Yeah,
Best Steel's other properties for a song, then took the new company public and made lots of money. And then they sold to Middle. Justice Department forced Middle to sell when they merged with Arcelor because they said it was going
yeah,
to be monopoly. They sold to Severstall, who had a lot of promises, but they were unable to follow through on them. And they're the ones who ultimately sold to I'm blanking on the name, the company that basically stripped the place before it was ultimately the property was
yeah,
purchased by Sparrows Point Terminal.
right.
Um,
And with
so yeah,
bankrupted
when you
and
drive down there now, there's no sign that there was ever a town or a steel mill down there, which is very sad for people like me who remember, what was.
well, it's also important for labor history because when
Mm-hmm.
you go to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the steelworkers, retirees up there, and local historians were able to grab revenue. The original mill closed in 97 and became a casino owned by Sheldon Adelson,
Yes.
but they were able to get a percentage of the casino revenue to preserve some of the mills. So you can still get tours of the plant and memories are there. And I think
Wow.
that's something so important for unions to know. Excuse me, I've got a phone here.
Yeah, and also, Bill, the two union halls on Dundalk Avenue are still there, basically slowly rotting. And I know we've talked in the past about, the ultimate fate of those union halls,
Yeah,
because given that the mill was completely demolished, to me, it's a no-brainer that someone, local history, maybe Baltimore Museum of Industry, should purchase one of those two union halls and maybe they could set up the museum there. I know that you've over the years accumulated an enormous
yeah.
amount of stuff that could be in that museum.
Well, it's a labor history. That's one of the reasons we tried to create this MD 250 Labor History Project. And as
Mhm.
far as I know, we're the only state that has one to try and remember that history. And we have huge amounts of material that we rescued from the halls, which are now looking for a home. And
Right.
it's just not, the halls have been sold several times and they're there, and who knows what's going to happen. So tell us how you started writing the book, what you did.
Okay, so I told you a little bit about my history, and I went on to go to college, as did many children of steel. I ultimately became a journalist, specifically a science writer, and working in a various capacities. And I published two books before Roots of Steel, and I can remember very clearly sitting at my desk in my final job at Johns Hopkins University, and the phrase "roots of steel" popped into my head, seemingly out of the blue. I had just sent in the manuscript of my second book, so I guess my subconscious was casting around for a new book idea, and I thought "roots of steel." And I also, and this seems a little woo-woo, but I had had a recurring dream over the years about the mill. Not the existing mill, but my sort of dream version of it. And who knows, maybe that played a part in it as well, as did the fact that for many years I thought, well, one of these days I have to write about Dundalk, not specifically about steel, but about Dundalk, and that sort of 1970s Dundalk that, was a big part of shaping me and the person that I became. The work ethic, for one thing. One of the things that I say in the book is, you could say many things about the men of my community, but the worst thing anyone could say about a man was he doesn't like to work. That was like the cardinal sin. Yeah, so I think both my brother and I absolutely, that work ethic was embedded in us, and also the sense of community, family. Faith also. I mean, all the best of working class culture was
Yeah.
embodied in the Dundalk that I was raised in, as were some of the not so great parts of it. But yeah, so I think all of those things came together in my decision to ultimately, pitch that idea to my publishers. Thankfully, they accepted it. And I started work on the book, going around town, interviewing as many retirees as I could find. And as you know, at that time that I was working on the book, which was, like 2008, 2009, there were still a lot of folks around whose memories reached back even to the World War II era. And
Yeah.
I talked to one person who actually was able to tell me about the union organizing campaign in
In
the 30s.
1941. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that was super exciting. I went to a bunch of senior centers and somebody would stand up and say, "This is Deborah. She's writing a book about the Point. If anyone here has memories of the Point, growing up there, working there." And I would be swarmed by people. I went to the union meetings. I also did a fair amount of archival research, not only at the Dundalk Patapsco Neck Historical Society, but I went up to the Hagla Museum in Delaware, where the papers of Frederick Wood were archived, and that was
All
fascinating.
right. Now stop right there and explain who Frederick Wood was.
Okay, so Frederick Wood was an MIT trained engineer who was hired by the Pennsylvania Steel Company to look for a site on Tidewater where they could bring in the raw materials, iron ore
And
that
this
they
is
were.
1880 we're talking.
Oh yeah, we're talking about 1880s, late 19th century. And Frederick Wood found basically this which was mostly farmland at that point. In the late 1880s and pitched this idea of, putting their steel mill, actually, yeah, their steel mill there. They Wood imported some of the old blast furnaces from the Ashland Iron Works, which was an even older iron producing mill, I guess you could call it, in Baltimore County. But then he created on Sparrows Point this kind of entirely new and much more efficient way of making steel. And his brother, Rufus Wood, was the one who was largely responsible for creating the company town.
Hmm.
And the company town was a really important part of the plan. And again, they imported not only some workers, but also some ideas from Ashland and other ironworks in that they wanted their workers on site and they kind of wanted to be able to control them,
Yeah,
which is why you could never buy a house on Sparrows Point. You could only rent from the company. You got all of the merchandise and foodstuffs you needed from the company store. And I can remember going to, that strip of on the point when I was a kid with my grandmother, seeing the doctor that was there, shopping in those stores.
Kaplan's department store.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was basically a little world, a highly
Yeah,
stratified and segregated
yeah,
little world, but it was a little world. And just about everyone I talked to who grew up on Sparrows Point had the fondest memories of the
yeah.
place.
Because it was a community, even the black workers.
Hmm.
Eddie Bartiz Sr. said he was there. His father died when he was young. People came around, both white and black, to help him out.
Yeah.
It was also
Yeah.
important that the opening of the plant was a shifting in American manufacturing from iron rails to steel rails.
Steel
And
rails.
iron rails were
Correct.
very uncertain, and that had been used for the railroads for 50 years. And but they would warp in the heat and in the cold. And so the invention of steel, and so three-quarters of the original production of Sparrows Point were rails. So
Right. Exactly. Until World War One, when munitions
yes, yeah, it
became the
really
source of
changed.
the companies. That's
Yeah,
when Pennsylvania Steel stole to Bethlehem,
yeah,
or as
okay,
they say in Baltimore, Bethlehem. And, the manufacture of armaments, not only on Sparrows Point, but in their other mills throughout the country, is really how Bethlehem Steel became quite a wealthy and
yeah.
successful company.
And one of the things that's really important in the decline and closure of Bethlehem Steel is the shifting in the last years to plastic from steel. And so instead of
Mm,
car bumpers being steel, they're plastic. And a lot of defense industry
mhm,
stuff is now plastic. And
mm.
so it's not like, oh, the union asked for too much or was a problem.
Oh no.
The
Mm-mm.
global shifting, both of
Hmm.
ownership and of technology.
Yeah, technology change was huge.
So did you find some new friends as you did the book?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the people that I met, well, first I have to say, but this book was published in 2010, it's now 2026. Obviously, a lot of folks have passed.
Yes.
For example, Eddie Barty
Yeah.
Sr., Ed Gorman, both big union guys, also older people that I talked to, like Joe Kotelchuk, but even some people who were not that old, like Melvin Schmeiser, who was not that much older than me, maybe a decade older. Loved talking to him. He died of pancreatic cancer a few years after I talked to
Mhm.
him. My uncle, Ray Rudacille, died of mesothelioma before the book was even published, so you know, I, I'm grateful that the book kind of brings them back to life in a way. And I've heard from some of their children saying, "Oh man, you really captured my dad. I can hear his voice and his
Great.
quotes." So the book is in some ways a memorial, not just to the mill, but also to those individuals who worked there and literally gave their life's blood to the place
Yeah.
because they were killed by diseases that I'm pretty certain were caused by their exposure to,
Yeah.
toxic chemicals and so forth.
Right. When you talk about the man dying of mesothelioma, that's clearly a Sparrows Point.
Oh yeah, because the only known cause of that is exposure to asbestos.
Right.
Yeah, that was my uncle. He was a bricklayer, and the
Yeah.
bricklayers down there
Yeah.
got walloped with
Hmm.
mesothelioma. But also, some folks, thankfully, are still around. Len Schindel, who started working down there in the 1970s, and sadly, another younger person that passed, Pete Selhorst, who was also in that cohort that came in with Len. And they were leftists, and they came in to sort of organize the workers. And one of the more interesting stories I think that came out of my interviews is how they kind of went in as communists but came out as trade unionists because
Yeah.
they realized that the steelworkers weren't interested in overthrowing the government. They just wanted a better share of the pie and more safety on the job.
Hmm.
So yeah, Mike Lewis, who's someone I actually met after I had finished the book, because I continued to report the story and published articles in the city paper and some other publications about, what happened after. When did I stop? Like 2009, I stopped interviewing for the book. And I met Mike, who was the union guy who was basically responsible for closing up shop down there on Dundalk Avenue. And we became good friends. So, yeah, I met a lot of people, some of whom are gone and whose memories I honor, but some of whom are still around. And I'm sure you've interviewed them for this podcast.
Some of them. I mean, Mike Lewis is now living in Newport News, Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
and he occasionally comes back. He remarried a woman down there, but he comes back here and goes to Coco's Pub with his mother,
Yes,
which is
right down the street from our houses.
yeah, really close. And I always rag him that he goes there and doesn't call me because I would come up and
Mhm.
have a. But one of the things that's important for history is that the union kept the halls open for several years after the plant
Sure.
closed in
Yes.
2012
Yep.
because Bethlehem Steel, or the steel company then, was going to throw away all the records.
Mm.
And many workers needed, for example, welding certification or other technical skills that they had to apply for new
Hmm.
jobs. And so the
Hmm.
union then went saved all those, had the hall open. And I think it's something that I have a new book out called Don't Trump on Us. And one of the things, the chapter is about dealing with displaced members. That
Yeah.
just because somebody is not under a contract or paying dues doesn't mean they're not a union person. And
Oh,
so,
and Bill, I know that I did, and I'm sure you did too. After Beth Steel had sold out and the halls were still open, I used to go to those monthly retiree
yeah.
meetings that were held at the hall. And it was such an interesting experience because so many of the retired workers would get together once a month at those meetings to hear the latest news, for example, on insurance and pensions and all that kind of thing, but also just to have some social time with their former coworkers. And I always found it so interesting that sort of people who had worked in, the individual parts of the mill, like the coke oven people or the tandem mill people or whatever, still kind of sat in their
Well,
same group
they often
meeting
have
as
departmental
teams.
reunions. We
Yeah,
went to one a
yeah.
couple of years ago. It was an L furnace reunion at the
Mm,
public library in Dundalk.
mm-hmm.
The original supervisor was there, and the people who are not familiar with Sparrows Point history, the town was eventually demolished in 1970s to permit the construction of the L
Yell
furnace.
furnace, right?
And unfortunately, one of the things was happened was 2015 or 16, the L furnace was demolished. We have
Yeah.
on
That
steel.
was the last really big structure that
Yeah.
they brought down. Hmm.
All right. Well, is there other material that you wish you had done or that you would do now?
Well, I'm very, very happy and kind of very satisfied with the book as it is. And, even though it's 15 years on, I still get emails from people, even people who did not grow up in Sparrows Point. Like most recently, I got a beautiful email from a man who said that his dad, who had been a steel worker in Pennsylvania, I believe that he said, kept the book by his bedside. It had been his favorite book. And after his dad died, he read the book. And he said, reading that book made me feel like I was with my
Hmm.
dad. And the story that you tell in that book is the story of our community also. So,
Good.
when I get messages like that, I'm like, all the sacrifices that I made when I wrote that book were absolutely worth it. But also, if I had the opportunity to do so, I really would love to, have a new edition of the book come out so that I could finish the story up through the ultimate closure and demolition and sort of the aftermath. I would love to do that. So who knows?
Well,
Maybe
one of
someone
the
will hear this and say, "Yeah, Deborah,
yeah, do it.
yeah, a couple of bucks to finish that or write another chapter in that book."
Well, one of the problems is the story has never ended. As long as
The
there is a
story has
single
never
person
ended.
alive who worked there or
Yep.
who grew up in a family there, and in the recent years, the kind of community scattered, and many
Mm-hmm.
workers, I always say, thanks to the union and the interstate highway system, workers moved to
Mm-hmm.
Bel Air and Abington, and there was a whole colony in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
So the community where you shop at the same place, you go to the same church, your kids intermarry and go to the same school, really was fractured. But it
Hmm.
is a part of American labor history that is so important to do.
Yep. And with so many lessons for people
Yeah,
today,
yeah.
so many important lessons for people today who are fighting against, for example, being replaced by AI. I actually know someone who's involved in a union organizing effort at a company that where the workers are kind of being asked to train their robot replacements.
No,
And knowing this history can help them.
no, it's a very different. All right. Thanks to Deborah Rudacille. The book is available at bookstores and also through the Pratt Library.
Yep.
And we'll
And Baltimore County Public Library.
Public Library, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, good, Deb.